Phoebe will smite the enemies with Imperator's Light, and in this video I will be telling you how to play, build, and in what teams to use your Phoebe, starting off with her kit. Phoebe's basic attacks do nothing special really, they're just the standard, but they're not useless, because we are getting into her skill next. Now, the skill will do a small bit of spectral damage, and it will summon a Ring of Mirrors. This Ring of Mirrors has a couple of special effects. First of all, whenever the Ring of Mirrors is created, the enemies that are within its range will be frozen in time for 2 seconds. This is nice and useful because it allows Phoebe to not have to care about getting hit. Next, if you are standing within the Ring of Mirrors, her basic attacks are enhanced. The scaling is within the skill and not within the basic attacks, but it does count as basic attack damage. However, if you hit enemies that are in the Ring of Mirrors, meanwhile Phoebe is outside of it, instead you will trigger a Holy Reflection, which does a bit of spectral damage counting as basic attack damage. Whenever the Holy Light Reflection is triggered, enemies within the Ring of Mirrors will be grouped closer together, which can trigger once every 0.5 seconds. So the skill will mainly be used to enhance your basic attacks. And if you want to know which one of the two modes is better, being inside or outside, being inside of the Ring of Mirrors will be stronger than being outside. Now normally I would cover the Resonance Liberation here, but I'm going to start with the Forte circuit instead just to make everything a bit less confusing. So Phoebe has 2 Forte bars, being Prayer and Divine Voice. Prayer will stack over time, needing 24 seconds to fully stack. When Prayer is at 120, you'll be able to do one of 2 things. Either cast your heavy attack Absolution Litany, or hold your skill to cast Utter Confession. Both of these will be able to apply 1 stack of Spectral Frazzle towards enemies. Both of these attacks will be restoring 60 Divine Voice. If you decided to cast Absolution Litany, Phoebe will enter the Absolution mode, which is meant for a hypercarry Phoebe. But if you use Utter Confession, Phoebe will instead enter the Confession mode, which will be a sub-DPS mode tailored around buffing Spectral Frazzle. These 2 states cannot coexist, so if you enter Absolution and you were in Confession before, your Confession will end. Now, what you will do with Divine Voice is after casting a dodge counter or your 3rd basic attack, Phoebe will be able to consume a certain amount of Divine Voice to use heavy attack Star Flash. Its effects will differ based on what stance you're in. If you're in Absolution, you'll be able to consume 15 Divine Voice to cast heavy attack Star Flash. And if an enemy has Spectral Frazzle, this heavy attack Star Flash will have its damage amplification increased by 256%, which is an insane damage buff. However, if you're in Confession, instead, it will be able to apply 5 stacks of Spectral Frazzle in cost of 30 Divine Voice. So, because the cap is 60, in Absolution you'll be able to cast it 4 times, and in Confession you'll be able to cast it 2 times. Alright, you still following? Good. Let's get going to the Resonance Liberation. Resonance Liberation will have Phoebe just do 1 big hit of damage. However, it gains buffs depending on whether you're in Confession or in Absolution. If you're in Absolution, the multiplier will be increased by 255%. But if you're in Confession, you'll instead be able to apply 8 stacks of Spectral Frazzle with it. So that's pretty simple. As for her intro skill, it will just do 1 hit of damage. It's not really that exciting. And then for her outro skill, it will also do damage, but it will again gain effects based on whether you are in Absolution or in Confession. In Absolution, again, you will be able to increase its multiplier by 255%. But if you're in Confession, instead you will grant a buff to your entire team. You'll be able to reduce the spectral resistance of enemies by 10%, and you will give 100% damage amplification to Spectral Frazzle, along with increasing its duration by 50%. However, because there is no current DPS that wants to focus entirely on Spectral Frazzle, that means that Confession can't really be fully utilized. So you will almost always just stick to Absolution, at least until we get a future Spectral Frazzle user. Her inherent skills are pretty basic. The first one will allow Phoebe to use her aerial heavy attack a 2nd time. Now, I didn't cover this in the kit explanation because it's not going to help you in combat at all. And then for the 2nd inherent skill, whenever Phoebe is in Absolution or Confession, she will gain 12% spectral damage bonus. As for Phoebe's talent priority, focus on leveling up her Forte circuit first. It is the biggest part of her damage output. Next up, focus on either her skill or her resonance liberation. It's kind of equal. If you use Sanhua in your team, focus up the skill, otherwise focus on liberation. You don't really need to level anything else, but if you insist, you can also level up her intra skill and her basics. They're not completely useless, but they're such a small part of her damage output and with the basics so situational for your damage output that I would not recommend leveling them. Next up for Phoebe's weapons. Her best weapon is obviously going to be the Luminous Hymn, being her signature weapon after all. It has a base attack of 500 and will give up to 36% crit rate. Its passive will give you 12% attack, and it will also give you 14% damage bonus to your basic attack and heavy attacks whenever you attack an enemy that is affected with Spectrofrazzle. Obviously, this is Phoebe's dedicated weapon, giving her everything she wants. Mainly the heavy attack damage, attack, and crit rate however. The basic attack damage is kind of whatever. But there is also the R1 Stringmaster, Yinlin's signature weapon. It, much like Luminous Hymn, has 500 base attack and 36% crit rate. However, its passive is where things change. You gain a flat 12% damage bonus just for nothing, so that's neat. And you also gain 12% attack whenever you use your resonance skill. And because Phoebe is only able to use her skill once within the duration, you're only going to be able to get one stack. But even then, it's still going to be Phoebe's second best in slots. There's also Zhezha's weapon, being the Rhyme Draped Sprouts. It, again, has 500 base attack, but instead it will give you 72% crit damage. This is actually better than the crit rate that Luminous Hymn and Stringmaster give, because Phoebe gets 20% crit rate from her set already. So she kinda overcaps on crit rate with those other two weapons. However, Rhyme Draped Sprouts does drop the ball a little bit, giving only 12% basic attack bonus and 12% attack, so it is still worse than Stringmaster. Her next best bet will be the Battle Pass weapon, Augment. It will give a decent amount of base attack with about 20.2% crit rate. However, its passive is where you get the real benefit. Whenever you use your Resonance Liberation, you will gain an absolute load of attack. Now this is mainly at R5, because at R1 the effect is much weaker. So I would really only use this if it's at R5, not really if it's anything lower. Then there is the Cosmic Ripples. It has a decent base attack and gives a lot of attack percent. It also gives a little bit of basic attack damage bonus, but like I said before, that's not really that relevant. But now we get to Phoebe's best in slot free-to-play option, being the R5 Ocean's Gift. This is going to be the free weapon from the 2.1 event, being her best free-to-play option and being quite a large margin better than most free-to-play options for most characters. It has a decent base attack and attack percent as the secondary stat. However, its passive is where you get the real value. Whenever you attack an enemy with Spectrofrazzle on them, you will gain 10% Spectro damage bonus, stacking up to 4 times. So this is a total of 40% Spectro damage bonus. This is quite a good effect, and a lot better than most 4 stars in the game. So this is going to be Phoebe's best free-to-play option. There's also the Walton Masquerade and also Fusion Accretion, but I really wouldn't look into any of those options because Ocean's Gift is just going to be better than them. But now that we've discussed her weapon options, it's time to look into Echoes, and the best set is obviously going to be the Eternal Radiance set. The 10% Spectro damage bonus from the 2-piece is obviously a nice bonus, but what you're really looking for is that 5-piece. You gain 20% crit rate after applying Spectrofrazzle, which Phoebe will do by entering one of her modes, and then if you attack an enemy with 10 stacks, she'll gain an additional 15% Spectro damage bonus. This is going to be her best set by quite a good margin. And the active echo you want to use is going to be the Nightmare Morning Ix, because it's a summon that doesn't require field time and has pretty okay damage. It also gives 12% Spectro damage bonus. Then, there is the Celestial Light set. It has the same 2-piece as Eternal Radiance, but its 5-piece will give an extra 30% Spectro damage bonus, compared to 15% and the 20% crit rate. It is going to be worse than the Eternal Radiance, but not by much. The active echo you would use in this scenario is going to be the regular Morning Ix. It has a cast time, yes, but its buffs are worth it compared to Jue's skill damage. As for the stats you want to build on Phoebe, for her 4 cost, you want to run crit rate or crit damage. It's going to be crit damage if your weapon has crit rate. Otherwise, you're still going to want to run crit rate. For your 3 cost, you either go Spectro damage or attack percent. And the difference here is bigger than for most characters, so I would try to stick to double Spectro. But again, much like every character in the game, it's just going to depend on what has the best substats. Do try to avoid running double attack percent though. Her energy requirement is going to be about 102% for a dual carry team, and then for a hyper carry team, it's going to be around 112%. So try and stick around the 115 range just to be safe. Now, moving on to her teams. Phoebe's teams are very unique because it's essentially a mix and match. Her mechanics make it so that it's very hard to effectively buff her, but she'll be able to do something, so don't worry about it. Her best team is going to be a dual carry team with either Changli or Shangliao, and then for the final slot you want to run the Spectra Rover on Rejuvenating Glow. Rover is able to heal thanks to S4, so that means that you are going to be fine. Rover is going to be in essentially every single team, because Phoebe really wants the external Spectrofrazzle application for her Absolution mode, so Rover's just always going to be here. Rover also has some pretty decent damage, so that's nice, and like I said earlier, Rover can run Rejuvenating Glow. But as for Changli and Shangliao, because it's so hard to buff Phoebe, you'd rather just want a character that has their own damage as well. And what better to use this for than a second DPS? Phoebe also has some good quick swap windows, like for example her enhanced heavy attack, or the cast of her skill, so you are going to be able to swap with her a bit. I imagine this will be played a bit closer to like a Colcharo dual carry team, where you are going to spend most of your time on Phoebe, and whenever you have the room to swap, you go to Changli or Shangliao to do something fast real quick. After this, we run into the hyper carry teams, the best one being with Sanhua and Rover. Sanhua is good for the usual reasons: S6 attack buff, great runner of Moonlit Clouds, and also just having a very fast rotation. Her basic attack buff can also be used for Phoebe's basics, but they aren't that big of a deal, so Sanhua's buffing isn't really the main reason use her. There's not really that much to say here. The reason that she is better than Mortefi is because Phoebe already gives herself so much damage amplification on her heavy attack that the extra 38% for Mortefi isn't really going to be doing much. Mortefi's personal damage is also not enough to make up for the fact that he has a longer rotation than Sanhua. So Sanhua is going to be better than Mortefi, but Mortefi is going to be your next best bet. If you really want to have a good healer in your team, however, running Verena or Shorekeeper alongside the Spectra Rover, who this time would be on Moonlit Clouds, is also going to be a strong team comp, capable of easily clearing the Tower of Adversity. So don't worry, no matter what your account looks like, your Phoebe will be able to make a team for herself. You can run dual carry, you can run Sanhua, you can run Mortefi, you can even just run Verena or Shorekeeper. She really doesn't care that much. Now finally moving on to Phoebe's sequences. Her first sequence will make it so whenever you're in Absolution, Phoebe's Resonance Liberation's damage multiplier will be increased by 480% instead of 255%. A big increase to her nuke, but not really for her rotation. But if you're in Confession, instead, you'll get a 90% damage multiplier buff, and you'll be able to apply the maximum amount of Spectrofrazzle on enemies, which currently is 10. This makes me think that Zani will be able to raise the cap, but that's going to be speculation for later. Her sequence 2 will make it so whenever you're in Absolution, the damage dealt by your outro skill to enemies with Spectrofrazzle will be amplified by 60%. This is again a decent increase. Within the Confession mode, instead, it will more than double the Spectrofrazzle buffing that Phoebe gives, and the Heavy Attack Starflash will be able to apply 2 extra stacks of Spectrofrazzle. This is going to be Phoebe's strongest sequence for her Confession mode. Then the S3. It will increase the damage multiplier of Heavy Attack Starflash by 123%. This is a massive increase for Absolution, but not really that relevant for Confession. This is the best sequence if you are going for Absolution Phoebe. For her fourth sequence, whenever you hit your basic attack, the target spectral resistance will be reduced by 10%. This is a pretty decent sequence. Not great, not that bad or anything, it's just okay. If you're at S5, casting your intro skill will increase Phoebe's spectral damage bonus by 12%. Really disappointing for an S5. Kinda bad. And then finally, for S6, whenever enemies enter the Ring of Mirrors, they will be frozen for 2 seconds, which can be procced once per Ring of Mirrors, so whenever you recast it, you'll be able to proc it again. Additionally, if you're in Absolution or Confession, casting your Resonance skill will allow an extra Heavy Attack Starflash to be performed, and because the skill has a 12-second cooldown, you'll be able to do this 2 times per rotation. This is definitely Phoebe's second strongest sequence for absolution. For confession, it's alright, but it's not really that crazy. I'd say for hypercarry Phoebe, if you want to vertically invest into her, get her weapon first, and then go until S3. If you only wanted to grab her up to use her with Zani later down the road, you can stop at S2. But I would recommend just getting your Zani first and leaving your Phoebe at S0 until Phoebe gets a rerun. Phoebe is looking to be a very strong DPS at launch, and even having potential to become a good support for characters down the road. Phoebe might have one of the most future-proof designs in the entire game, and I'm really excited about this considering that she's my favorite character right now. I hope you guys learned something from this guide, and if you did, be sure to like the video and subscribe. While you're down there, be sure to let me know in the comments below if you have any questions. If you want to make sure that the question gets answered, you can join my Discord, in which I'm very active. If you just want to hear my random thoughts and ramblings, be sure to follow me on X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it. Both of them are linked in the description. But that'll be it from me. Peace.